Good evening. Good to be with you again tonight. I want to speak this evening on the subject of giving. And I think pretty often if we hear a sermon introduced that way, we think first of all of the Sunday contribution. And that is certainly one aspect of giving, but really that is only one aspect of the giving that the Bible talks to us about. And we've heard plenty of teaching, I suspect, on the subject of giving in regard to the contribution to a local congregation. I want to take a more general approach to the idea of the subject of giving this evening. And I want to start in maybe an unlikely place, I don't know, but Luke chapter 10, the parable of the Good Samaritan. Luke chapter 10. And we'll begin in verse 30. Jesus has been asked about who our neighbor is, and he responds with this parable. Jesus replied and said, "A certain man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, and they stripped him and beat him, and went off, leaving him half dead. And by chance a certain priest was going down on the road that day, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise a Levite also, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, who was on a journey, came upon him, and when he saw him, he felt compassion. He came near him, or came to him, and bandaged up his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them. And he put him on his own beast, and brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And on the next day he took out 2 denarii, and gave them to the innkeeper, and said, 'Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I return, I will repay you.' And Jesus then asks, which one, the priest, the Levite, or the Samaritan, proved to be a neighbor to this man. What motivated this Samaritan to do the things that he did? Well, Jesus says, in creating this story, Jesus says that when this man saw the wounded man, he felt compassion for him. That's got to be the basis of our giving. In whatever aspect of life and in whatever aspect of giving, that's got to be the basis of it, that we care about somebody, that we care about fulfilling a need. To have that love within us. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, Paul talks about love to the Corinthians who've shown a distinct lack of love for one another. And he says in chapter 13, verse 2, "If I have the gift of prophecy and know all mysteries and all knowledge, if I have all faith so as to move mountains, but don't have love, I'm nothing." Love has to be the basis of these things. We think about the greatest commandment and the second greatest commandment that Jesus speaks about in Matthew chapter 19. I'm going kind of quick from passage to passage here for a moment with you. But Matthew chapter 19 and that is not the right passage. Well, I don't want to waste a lot of time finding the passage, but I'll remind you of the passage. Jesus is asked, what's the greatest commandment? And he says, to love your God with all that you are, in essence. And then he says, and there's a second commandment like it, to love your neighbor, to love your fellow man. And that comes from the Old Testament. Sometimes I think we suppose that loving your neighbor as yourself is a New Testament thing. Well, it is a New Testament thing, but it was originally an Old Testament thing. We go back to Leviticus chapter 19, and there we see these commands to love one who's close to us and one that we don't even know. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. "You shall not take vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am Jehovah. And then down in verse 34, in verse 19, we read there about loving your neighbor as yourself. Down in verse 34, the stranger who resides with you shall be to you as the native among you. In other words, a man from some other nation who's living among the Israelites. This is the stranger who resides with you shall be to you as a native among you. And you shall love him as yourself. For you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am Jehovah, your God. So this love, this Samaritan felt compassion for this man who'd been stripped and robbed and left half dead on the road. What did the Samaritan give? Talking about giving this evening. What did he give? Well, he gave those 2 denarii. My notes say that that's equivalent to about 2 days' wages. So, it's a fair amount of money to the innkeeper. So that the innkeeper would take care of him. And the Samaritan says, if you spend more, I'll pay you back for that too when I return. But it wasn't just money that this Samaritan gave. He bandaged him up. He evidently had some materials with him to do some bandaging. I don't know if you carried that kind of thing with you as a rule in those days when you were traveling along a desert road. Maybe so, as this was in fact a road that robbers tended to operate on, at least from what we read. So he either has that kind of thing with him, or he just uses some things that he does have with him. That's giving. Using his materials to bandage up this man. Used his oil and his wine to pour on the wounds of this man, to clean those wounds. He used his feet. How did he use his feet? Well, Jesus says that he put the wounded man on his own beast. I don't know, maybe both of them rode on the beast, but I've always kind of pictured him as him leading this beast with the wounded man on it. He took an animal, a mule, a donkey, I don't know what it was, on this journey because he didn't want to walk on this journey. But now he walks. He's giving to this man that he's helping. And he involves the innkeeper in this care. Maybe it's a little awkward. Hey, I brought this guy in. I'm going to stay here for a bit, but then I've got to go. Can you take care of him? But the Samaritan does all of this. All of those things are forms of giving. So I want to expand this topic beyond giving money or physical possessions to just a broader idea of giving. So I want to talk about both those things, money and giving of yourself to those who need. First, we'll talk about money. And I think maybe one of the big hurdles in us being willing to give our money to people who have some need, or to give things of worth to people who have some need. I think one of the biggest hurdles for that is that we tend to view our own income and our own possessions just as I just now said it, our own possessions, our own income. That's what I got. And we don't view it as something to be readily shared. Oh, true. I think each of us kind of wants to be able to give on occasion and in reasonable amounts. But we have this thinking that all of this is mine and I shouldn't have to give very much of it up. I'll give some up, but this is mine. I have plans for this. I have uses for this for me. How do we have the things that we have? James chapter 1 verse 17, every good thing bestowed and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights. All that we have, God gave to us. And it's still His in a way. Psalm 50 verse 10 the Lord says that the cattle on 1,000 hills belong to him. So to go out and count, 1,000 hills. Okay, the cattle on those hills, those belong to the Lord. But my hill's over here, and my cattle on my hill, those are mine. That verse means all the cattle on all the hills belong to the Lord. People have cattle. That cattle belongs to the Lord. They are stewards of those cattle. I don't know if any of you have cattle. At Hillcrest, where I usually am, there are 3 families who have cattle. And so this was easier to talk about there. I said, those cows aren't yours. But whatever the things that we have are, whether they're cattle or whatever, our cars, our homes, our recreational things, the things with which we earn income, those things aren't just ours. Those in some sense belong to the Lord as well. And we're stewards of those things. When we look at our finances and we're deciding what we can afford, we need to remember Ephesians 4:28. Let him who steals, steal no longer. I'm not suggesting that you all are a bunch of thieves, but the principle here is good to think about. Rather, let him labor, performing with his hands what is good, in order that, here's a passage that tells why we work, why we earn income. Performing with his hands what is good, in order that he may have something to share with him who has need. I see 3 principles in Scripture about why we earn money. One is to provide for ourselves the things that we need. Another is to provide for our families the things our families need. And this is the third, to share with him who has need. I think we're really good at thinking about the first 2, providing for myself and providing for my family. When we take a new job and we see the income that we're going to get, and we think, do I want to accept this job? Do I want to argue for more money? This amount, it'll pay my bills, it'll pay for some vacation time, it'll pay for this other thing that I want to buy, it'll pay for education for the kids. This is good. I can do this. And we budget out everything for ourselves. But there's 3 reasons we work. Provide for ourselves, provide for our families, and have something to share with him who has need. In Luke chapter 12, verse 16, we have the story of this rich man. Luke chapter 12, verse 16. He told them a parable saying, the land of a certain rich man was very productive. And he began reasoning to himself, saying, what shall I do, since I have no place to store my crops? He has an abundance. He's got some barns. Apparently this particular year, his barns, or rather, I'll say it the other way, his crops were so great that he couldn't fit all the harvest into his barns. So what does he do? He's got an abundance this year. And he's only thinking about himself and his family, rather than thinking about having something to share with them who have need. I'm sure, whenever I talk about parables, I begin talking about them as real people. But I'll go ahead and do that. I'm sure in this story of this rich man, there would have been other people around who didn't have as much as he did. Probably some who didn't have much at all. It's the reason in the Old Testament God commanded the people not to harvest every last grain from the field, but to leave the edges unharvested, so that the poor could come and glean from those crops something for themselves. But this man is only thinking about self and possibly his family. and not thinking about the third thing we read about in Ephesians 4:28, to share with him who has need. So what's the Lord's attitude toward this? Well, the man says, well, I'm just going to build bigger barns, provide even more for myself, so that, as he says in verse 19, my soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your soul is required of you, and now who will own what you have prepared? So is the man who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. His wealth, he only planned for himself. Didn't think about sharing it with others. We've got to adjust our concept. If we have a problem with this, we've got to adjust our concept about my income is all for the stuff that I want. Got to stop thinking like that. Another hindrance, another hurdle we need to overcome is that our giving is all summed up in the Sunday contribution. Yeah, I put a nice check in there, I put a nice pile of cash in there. There, I'm a giving person. Well, that's good, but that's just one aspect of our giving. In fact, I would suggest to you that for whatever this is worth, and I think it's worth something, there are very few passages in the New Testament that talk about, a Sunday contribution, this collection of money among the members of a congregation. That doesn't mean it's not important. It is important. But there are a lot more passages in the New Testament that just talk about giving in general, that talk about simple generosity, giving and sharing. I'll run through very quickly without even turning to them. You know most of these. Matthew chapter 6, when Jesus is talking about giving alms, and he's saying, don't do that to be seen of men. In Acts chapter 4, when there are all these new Christians in Jerusalem, and because they're there from out of town, they begin selling things that they have. And Barnabas was one, and he sold a piece of property that he owned in order to give it to those who needed. In Matthew chapter 25, that passage where Jesus is talking about the basis on which the judgment will be made of our souls at the end of time. It's about things like, did you give to others? Did you give food to the hungry? Did you give clothing to the naked? In Luke chapter 3 and verse 11, Jesus says, if you have 2 tunics, give one to the person who doesn't have any. All of these passages, 1 Timothy chapter 6, let those who are rich in this present world be ready to share the things that they have. So all of these passages, and many more than I mentioned here, that talk about just in general the need that there is to give. We'll talk a very practical nature here for a moment. Some opportunities that we might come across to give. Obviously, if you ever find yourself on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho, and you see a man who's been beaten up with robbers, there's a chance to give. But we can move beyond the specific details of that. Maybe you meet somebody in town who's had some bad things happen. There's an opportunity possibly to give. Now I know when it's someone you don't know at all, there's the challenge of, is this somebody that it's wise to give money to? I struggle with that. When people approach me or they're at some street intersection and asking for money, and I don't know the first thing about them. Is that a good use of the funds? Are they going to be good stewards of that? And I haven't yet figured out how to answer that question every time. I did was it last night or the night before? I think it was the night before. I gave $10 to a guy. His story seemed to make sense, and he needed some food. So I gave that to him. But I don't want to get up here and act like I give to all of those people, because that's the exception more than the rule for me, actually. For one reason, I'm not in a position to give to every one of those people I see. I'd be on the street if I did that. And we'll see a passage in a little bit that mentions that. Well, in fact, we already have. If you have 2 tunics, give one to the man who has none. If you only have 1 tunic, Jesus doesn't say give that 1 tunic to the man who has none, because now you're in his position, you don't have a tunic. But if you have some extra, on some occasions be willing to give. Maybe you run across, you're at a restaurant, and sometimes the servers are more talkative, and you get into a conversation with them, and you may meet somebody with a story that you realize this person really needs some help out of a situation right now. And you might leave a big tip for that person. What if I said you might leave a $200 tip for that person? That's a lot of money. I do some door dashing to make some extra money. One night, I had taken a lot longer for this person's order because it had gotten confused, and I waited around at the restaurant when most drivers would just give up and leave and unassign themselves for that order. But I hung in there and I waited, and I finally got the person's order, and I delivered it to her, and she gave me $200 tip. I couldn't believe it. And I hardly had time to object. I don't know that I was going to object anyway. But she just handed it to me and started walking back in the building where she lived. And as she walked away, I kind of looked at it and I realized I don't know that I knew exactly how much it was. I think it was a whole bunch of 20s. I said, that's a lot of money, dude. I don't usually say dude to girls, but I was surprised. And she said something and just disappeared. And, she did live in a nice apartment building. In fact, it may have been condos or something, but she didn't live in a mansion. But she decided to give that amount of money. Maybe we can do that sometimes. It's good to give when we see people who might need what we're able to give them. I remember, if you'll indulge me a moment, when I was just out of college and worked with the church in Annandale, Virginia, along with the preacher there. In fact, being from Ohio, some of you might have known Floyd Chapelier. He was with the Annandale Church in those years, and I worked alongside him for 7 months as a very young man, just out of college. And the last several months of that, I lived with Cal and Billy Mann. And they let me live in an extra bedroom in their townhouse. And they didn't charge me any rent. And when I left, when I was leaving that place, we were saying our goodbyes, and he handed me a check. Again, it's ironically, it's for $200. $200 was more then in 1985 than it is now. But he handed me a check for $200. I said, I can't accept this. And you've been letting me live here for free. There's no reason you owe me $200. I didn't want to accept it. And he said, and I'll always remember this, he said, Darryl, after I had objected several times, and he tried to hand it to me several times, he said, Darryl, when somebody gives you something, you smile and say thank you. Yes, sir. I smiled and I said thank you. And I've done that several times since then. When I've tried to give something to somebody, and they don't want to accept it. They think, well, you don't owe this to me, you don't have to give it. And I've told them that story. And I said, so, when I'm giving you this, you should smile and say thank you. And every time that has worked. They've smiled and they've said thank you. So there you go. That's a tool you can use to be generous. and show that you want to help people who maybe don't necessarily have to have the help, but you know it would be helpful to them. Back to the Samaritan. Because not all giving is about money. He gave those 2 denarii. He promised to pay more when he came back. But not all giving is about money. He bandaged him. He took the time to do this. He used his oil and his wine. He walked and let the other guy ride on the animal. He took care of him. He involved the innkeeper in this whole situation. All of that is a form of giving. We need to give of ourselves. 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Now, it's true Paul is talking about giving of himself in terms of spiritual help, spiritual encouragement and teaching. But I love the phrase that he uses here in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 14 and 15. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 14. Here, for this 3rd time I'm ready to come to you, and I will not be a burden to you, for I don't seek what is yours, but you. I don't seek what is yours, but you. For children are not responsible to save up for their parents, but parents for their children. And I will most gladly spend and be expended for your souls. He's ready to spend money, uses money to help them, but he's also ready to be expended. In other words, to spend himself, to use his time, to use his energy, to use his thinking, to help them. For his money to be spent and for him to be spent, to help them. As you look across your workplace, your neighborhood, your school, your list of friends, brethren in the congregation here, if you look with wisdom, you'll see people who have needs. Maybe it's somebody who just needs some emotional support. Be that for them. Maybe it's someone who really needs to see a better example than they are seeing in some others. Be that good example. Focus on that. That's a form of giving. Maybe it's somebody who needs some shelter. Maybe it's somebody who needs some encouragement. Maybe it's somebody who needs people to trust in them because he's felt betrayed and he just needs somebody to show they trust him. Put your trust in that person. That's a form of being expended, spending yourself for those around you. Maybe it's somebody who needs some form of mentor, somebody to guide them. Be that for them. Maybe it's somebody who needs somebody they can confide in, that they can trust. Be that. Be a friend to people in any of those circumstances. You look across a congregation and sometimes it can say, well, everybody's fine here. We look fine on the outside, but often on the inside, we're not so fine. And if you look, you will see that there are needs. That there's really very few of us that are just absolutely fine in every way on the inside. There are things that we struggle with, that our fellow Christians can give that support to us. You can give that support to others. Some people are shy, but they don't ask for things. Some people are weak and discouraged, but they're afraid to admit the struggles that they have because what? Everybody else is so strong spiritually, I don't want to admit the struggle that I have. Some people maybe feel different. Maybe they're of different ethnicity, personality, education than others, and they feel different. They don't feel like they fit in. Be that person that makes them feel fit in. There are all kinds of ways we can give. Some people may not even realize the need that they have, but if you look with wisdom, you can see there's a need there. There's something that I can do for that person. But often all those kinds of needs go unfulfilled because we're not thinking about giving of ourselves as much as we could. if we will think about those things and get involved and give of ourselves, that need will be filled, and we will find fulfillment in doing that. Well, let's look at a few more passages. I've just kind of been talking for the last few minutes. I want us to look at some more passages. Romans chapter 12, verse 16. Be of the same mind toward one another. Do not be haughty in mind, but associate with the lowly. Be of the same mind. Don't be arrogant. Don't lift yourselves up and say, oh, I don't have to help them. They should fix their own problems. Associate with the lowly. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 8. To sum up, let all be harmonious, sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted, and humble in spirit. Those three words in the middle: sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted. What's the essence of kindness? Is the essence of kindness saying, hi, how are you today? Well, showing an interest in how people are doing is, in fact, a kind thing, but the essence in kindness is not simply, some of the phrases that we use, but it's doing things that are helpful. That's what kindness is. Giving of yourself to satisfy a need. Brotherly, sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted. There in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 8. Matthew chapter 25. We've mentioned this passage already, but I want to go ahead and read this. Matthew chapter 25, as Jesus is describing that final day when he as king will announce the judgment of all those who will stand before him. Matthew chapter 25, verse 34. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. All this giving of self and giving of material things to those, to Jesus in need. And the righteous will answer him, verse 37, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? I don't remember doing any of that. And the king will answer and say to them, truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it to one of these brothers of mine, even the least of them, you did it to me. In this passage at least, the thing that we're going to be judged on, I don't want to make it sound like this is the only thing, but in this passage, the thing that we're going to be judged on is, were we giving of ourselves to others around us? So be a friend. Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 24. We're going to look at three passages in the Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 24. A man of many friends comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. What do you see in that phrase, sticks closer? He's there to fill your needs. That kind of friend is the kind of friend we need to be to people. Who's there and sticks around and helps you through, helps a person through whatever they're going through. That's giving. Proverbs chapter 11, verse 13. Proverbs 11, verse 13, he who goes about as a talebearer reveals secrets, but he who is trustworthy conceals a matter. I don't know, that this one maybe doesn't fit quite as well as some of the others in our topic this evening. But to be the kind of friend that is trustworthy, and you can go to that person and you can confide in him about something that you don't want everybody knowing about, and you can trust him that he's going to be there for you and talk with you and help you through whatever that is, without going the very next day and saying, hey, did you hear what so-and-so? You can be that friend. That's helpful. That's a form of giving. It's a giving of yourself. Proverbs chapter 17, verse 9. I tell you what, we're not going to take the time to turn there, but makes the very same point. People need friends like that. We can be friends like that. That's giving something to the people around us. Hebrews, in the New Testament, Hebrews chapter 13, verses 2 through 3. Don't neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by this some have entertained angels without knowing it. Remember the prisoners as though in prison with them, and those who are ill-treated, since you yourselves also are in the body. The ill-treated, we haven't seen verses so far that bring that thought in. People who've been treated badly. From the fact that the Hebrews author goes ahead to say, since you two are in the body, makes me think that when he says ill-treated, he's talking about people who've been physically hurt. Be there for them. Help them. People who've been ill-treated by family, by their spouse, by people at work, by their peers. So many people that suffer those kind of things. Or all these other kind of things that we've talked about. So many ways that people need us to give of ourselves. Giving of ourselves is a lot more than handing some money to someone. It's being the kind of friend and helper that people need. It is giving money, because when you get involved with someone and their needs, and you're trying to help them through whatever it is they're dealing with or have been afflicted by, often that does include some cost to you. But it's the giving of yourself to them that's central to it. And I'll remind you again, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, when Paul said that he would gladly spend and be expended for those people. Giving money is sometimes exactly what's needed. But really getting involved and giving yourself is also needed. I'm going to close with a passage from Galatians chapter 6. Galatians chapter 6, verse 9, and let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we shall reap if we do not grow weary. So then, while we have opportunity, let us do good to all men, and especially to those who are of the household of the faith. So I urge you to think about your level of giving. You know, you have all these programs and charities, and you hear this phrase, you know, level of giving, this level or that level. I'm not talking about that, but how giving are you as a person? In terms of just money, but also in terms of just giving yourself. And I urge you to think about those things as it is such an important concept in Scripture. In a moment, we're going to sing our invitation song. Well, both of these songs have tonight in it. Was it 629? 629. Oh, why not tonight? If you have some need that the brethren here can help you with, can pray for you about, or to be baptized into Christ for the forgiveness of your sins, to put your trust in Him, to decide to live for Him. What reason is there not to do that tonight? If you would, come as we stand and sing.
Oh, do not let the word depart.